All right, and I'm here this week with the amazing Sam, my friend Sam, who has an amazing life story to share. Sam is the host of the podcast Beyond Labels that tells stories about everything related to special needs. Parents, professionals, all sharing their stories. Sam, I couldn't be happier to have you here. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and I can't
Thank
wait.
you.
And I
Thank
can't
you,
wait
Aldo.
what we'll talk about. So as we're waiting for people to join us now, why don't we go ahead and kind of introduce yourself? Just tell people that are watching, a little bit about you, who you are, what led you to this journey, to your podcast, because you have so many great stories. And I'll just remind everyone, if you're watching live, go ahead and type hashtag live so you know you're here with us. And if you're watching the replay, type hashtag replay so we can acknowledge you afterwards. So go ahead, Sam.
Sure. So, my name is Sam, and I am the mother of an 18-year-old son. He has multiple diagnoses, primarily is autism, intellectual disability, epilepsy is the most recent one. So, and most recently, we've started kind of a new passion project. It's a podcast that's aimed at parents like me who are trying to navigate the system in a world that's not necessarily built for us. So, trying to jump all the hurdles that a lot of parents don't always have to jump through, and there's not a lot of advice for.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think, as special needs parents, one of our biggest challenges is actually getting answers, right, to our questions. And we know that there are other families out there going through the same things that we go through at home, but finding those people sometimes is a challenge. And
Yes.
so I guess with that in mind, you created the podcast to create a place where people can share their knowledge and experience and kind of be a resource for other special needs parents to find those
Yes.
answers, is it?
Exactly, Aldo. So we want to bring in just a lineup of guests, everything from fellow parents who have done it to financial experts or insurance experts like yourself. I've also had some IEP experts on there, and I've had some therapists. Some of David's teachers have come on. So I'm looking forward to just bringing on all kinds of guests to share their story or to share their expertise so that we can all learn together.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we kind of do the same, same thing with our Facebook group, Special Needs Family Planning and Support. Just bringing people together, bringing families together, so we can have conversations and also bring in the experts, so that our families can actually ask those questions, right? And find the answers and that way kind of eliminate or reduce the anxiety and stress and uncertainty, which is so much a part of being a special needs parent. So again, if you're just joining us now, go ahead and type hashtag live so you know you're here. We're gonna get started. Like I said, Sam has an amazing story to share, her own family, her son David. And so Sam, I know that one thing that stuck with me when we first talked was the fact that David was a NICU baby, right?
He was.
And because my son was also a NICU baby. So that alone, without adding special needs to the mix, I mean, that alone is a lot for us parents to deal with, right? So, how was your
Absolutely.
journey in NICU?
So, yeah, when I was 21 years old, actually, my first experience with the NICU, I gave birth to my first son, and he was born at 27 weeks, and he weighed 1 pound and 8 ounces. But unfortunately, he only lived for 3 days. I gave birth early because of preeclampsia. But unfortunately, his lungs were just not developed, and he couldn't hang on. So he passed away after 3 days. So 3 years later, in 2005, I was pregnant again, and of course, I was terrified that the same thing was going to happen. And I was high risk, and I immediately got into the for prenatal care and all of that stuff. So I was very closely watched the entire time. Unfortunately, it did happen again. I did have preeclampsia again. So at 26 weeks, I delivered David. He was born at 1 pound and 4 ounces, and he was 12 and a half inches long. So he was real little. And I actually did share a picture with you if you'd like to put that up on the screen and show everybody.
It's right on
So
the.
he was tiny. In that picture, you can see my hand next to him. So you could literally like count every single one of his ribs. He was little bitty when he was born. And it was a very, very long hospital stay. We went, he had several surgeries while we were in there. He ended up, before we left the hospital, he had a Mickey button. He had a procedure called Nissen fundoplication, I think.
That's
Nobody come at me
that's
if I say that wrong. He also had LASIK eye surgery because he had retinopathy of prematurity. And oh, and he had hernias, and I believe that that was all the surgeries that he had before we left the hospital the first time. But he was hospitalized 10 days shy of 6 months the first time, and then we brought him home, and we were unfortunately only home for a week. We had just barely gotten all of the oxygen machines set up and the feeding tubes because like I said he had a Mickey button, which that means, in case anybody doesn't know, he that means that he wasn't able to take any feeds by mouth, and so all of the foods, medicine, everything went into directly into his stomach. It was like a port directly into his stomach.
mm-hmm.
So that means that we had feeding tubes. They kind of look like IV stands. They
Okay.
have like bags of food and they just feed directly into his stomach. So we had just barely gotten all of that set up at home, and then bam, he got RSV. So we ended up back in the hospital for another week or so, and we finally got him back home. And he, we were home for about 3 weeks or 3 months. I'm sorry. And then one night he ended up getting really dehydrated. He had a lot of loose stools and just got really, really dehydrated. And we took him in to the hospital. By the time we got there, he was so dehydrated they weren't even able to find a vein to enter to put fluids in. So they ended up having to put a needle in his kneecap. It was really, really scary. And that night he ended up going into something called pulmonary hypertension crisis, and they had to put him on a high frequency ventilator, which, in case anyone hasn't seen that, it literally will shake their body. It's something like 120 breaths a minute or something, and it's so that it keeps their lungs open. And he was on a high frequency ventilator for weeks and weeks. And honestly, although I thought at that point that I really thought that I was losing another baby at that point. I really believed that, but he did manage to pull through. Due to all of that and the lack of oxygen that he experienced through all of the various crises that he experienced, he does have some brain damage. And so when I brought him home from the hospital, I knew that he had, I can't remember what they called it, but it's going to come to me later. But basically, the white matter in the front of your brain
Mm-hmm.
was dead because of the lack of oxygen.
Okay.
So, and I knew at that point that he was going to have cerebral palsy, or that he did have cerebral palsy. And they also told me that he would have a hard time walking and talking. Those, just based on where the brain damage was at. Of course, they said there's no way to really know. And a lot can happen because of therapy and all of the other things that have happened, with medical stuff. So,
Right.
anyways, I brought him home finally from the hospital. Of course, we had home health nurses that we had like 55 hours a week of home health nursing, and that was interesting because as a parent you expect to take care of the baby yourself, and and to do all of the stuff for yourself, but I had somebody coming into my home and doing all of that stuff for you. So that's kind of an adjustment. Did you ever have home health nurses with your baby?
Yeah. So in our case, we didn't. When Mateo was discharged from NICU, he stayed in NICU for almost 3 months. He was born at 30 weeks. So when he came home, he was pretty much, right at full gestational age, maybe a couple weeks older. Um, Over most of the life threatening issues that he dealt with, mostly respiratory in NICU. So we didn't have nurses, but we did have a lot of monitors and alarms, and like monitors that you couldn't even turn off because those machines don't have an on-off switch, right? Because they're supposed to go off if the child stops breathing. So we had our share, but
Yes.
maybe not as overwhelming, I would say, as what you guys had to deal with.
Yeah, so David was on oxygen until he was about 2 years old. And he was also that's about the time that he started to walk. So because of the delays, he had therapy, several different therapists. They came out from early childhood intervention, would come to my house several times a week. So in addition to the home health nurses, I also had therapists in and out of my home 2 or 3 times a week trying to teach him to sit up. First it was, roll over and then sit up and then stand up. And it wasn't until he came off that oxygen really that he started to walk. And he had a Mickey button until he was probably 4 or 5, and I've shared on my podcast before that the only reason that that came out was because he just physically pulled it out, and by the time I noticed it, it had almost I couldn't get it back in because it closed so much, so we just went
Right.
ahead and left it out and gave him his medication by mouth, and it worked out. So, by the time he was about 5 or so, all of the tubes were completely gone.
Okay, so I do want to direct our attention to the fact that you said that David started walking at 2. However, doctors had told you that he may never walk ever, right?
Yes, yes. So
And
we were pleased about that.
right, so we hear that all the time. Certainly, was the case with us, where, and I'm not, I don't know if necessarily, doctors necessarily don't know, so they have to err on the side of caution, or if they truly believe that something that they've read once, in a textbook will repeat itself. But the fact is, or if it's just really our faith and strength and resolve to really help our children. But a lot of these things end up turning out for the better, right? I mean, as far as prognosis, right? And so I'm sure you guys were glad to see him walking at 2,
Yes,
and really start to become more
yes.
active, if you will. And so, okay, so at that point, was he still getting all of these therapies at home or outside of the home? So what did that look like? I mean, your routine with doctors and therapies and things like that.
So while we still had home health nurses, I've worked through this entire time. I've always maintained a full-time job, a full-time career. So the home health nurses would actually take care of David while my husband and I went to work and to, bring in the money. So we would get up and the home health nurse would get there before we left, and she would take care of him, give him his feedings and his medications, and give him, all of the different tummy times and all the stuff that he needed for therapies and stuff like that until we got back home. And then at that point, we would I mean, it was just a constant process of drawing up medicines and fixing feeding bags and listening to apnea monitors and just it was constant. And like you said, doctor's appointments. I mean, those were all the time, especially because of the pulmonary hypertension crisis. Now you have a cardiologist on top of everything else. So, but at the point that he was about 2, the cardiologist graduated him, so he didn't have to go back to see them anymore. They were confident that that was just a one issue and that everything was good on that end. So I'm very thankful that he doesn't have any continuing heart issues on top of everything else.
Okay, so it seems like we start with this whole list of specialists and therapies that we do, and then over time, we start crossing off some of those names, right? Or our children graduate from at least that has been the case here with us, and that brings a lot of relief. But also, I mean, we felt as parents, right? Every time a doctor, for example, will say, okay, I don't need to see him every month now. Maybe we'll do every 6 months. On one hand, we're relieved, but on the other hand, we're like, okay, so now it's on us to make sure that that aspect of his life, is taken care of. So kind of shifting the responsibility, if you will, to us parents. So you kind of feel good and anxious at the same time, right? I mean, did you guys feel something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, because you never know when those things are going to come back. And if there's not a professional that's constantly watching it, they're like, you guys are trusting me to know that everything's okay. So, but hey, we managed to make it through, right? Just keep on at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one thing that we always heard from NICU doctors and nurses is, yeah, the monitors are there for several reasons, but they just kept telling us, don't look at the monitor, look at your baby first, see what it looks like. Even if the monitor is beeping right now and the heart rate is not showing perfect, just look at him, because sometimes the monitor doesn't tell the whole story, right? So, and you get used to it and you really learn how to read your child like that, to the point where as parents, we really know more about a lot of things than even some doctors and nurses do, right? From
Agreed.
experience.
Agreed. Yep, we sure do. And he has definitely been through a lot of therapies over the years, a lot of speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, the whole gamut. So we've we've experienced it all.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna start shifting gears here and talking more about David growing up, and whatnot. But if you're just got here and if you're watching this, my name is Aldo Venturacci. I'm the admin of the Special Needs Family Planning and Support Facebook group, and today I have Sam, our dear friend here, sharing her own personal journey with her son here on our weekly lives. If you're not yet part of the group and you have a child or a grandchild with any type of special needs, or if you're a caretaker for a child with special needs, then I'd like to invite you to join our Facebook group. Just type hashtag group in the comments and I'll reach out to you with the link to join. It's absolutely free. Inside the group, you have a chance to have closer interaction with myself. So any questions you have regarding planning, financial planning, or planning for your child's future, funding their future, their education, or really anything related to finances, you'll be able to ask me. We have our estate planning attorney, Ashley McKenzie, also in the group answering questions like special needs trusts, able accounts, powers of attorney, and things of that nature. And then we have a whole team of professionals, from physical therapists to music therapists and an IEP advocate. I mean, really, we're growing this group to be a resource for special needs families, to really have a place to have, not only a place to have open conversations with other families, but also to access professionals and really be able to ask questions that you would otherwise not be able to ask on your day to day. So, I'm off my little soapbox. Okay, the plug is done. So, Sam, so now let's talk about going into David's, like toddler years and then growing up, school, and all of those things, because I think a lot of parents, especially when they have very, very young ones, the thought of sending their child to school, can be, daunting. So
Oh,
what did that
yes.
look like for you
Yes.
guys?
So when David was 3 years old, he entered the school system in a program called PPCD, which I've recently been told it's not called that anymore. So I don't know what it's called now, nor do I know what the acronym PPCD stands for. But I do remember going into school and his teacher that he got that year, and bless her heart, she's still on my Facebook and she is the sweetest girl. But I was, naturally very protective over, my little 3-year-old boy who had a whole slew of health issues and I had never been away from me. And I remember I was just like, so like, you look really young, I was just like really protect, but she was fantastic. I have, over David graduated school last year in May, but over the 15 or so years that we were in the school district, I have no bad things to say about any of the school teachers that we've come in contact with. It's just been phenomenal. There's really a special place for people that can do that all day long. They have the utmost patience. It's just amazing. So we went through the PPCD school district or the school system, and then he graduated up into the regular elementary school. And so, I've been to my fair share of arts. With the IEPs and all of that jazz. And I did have Jessica Silber on my podcast a couple of weeks ago, in which she gave me some really good information that I wish that I would have known, over the years, about making sure that each IEP is individualized for your child. It's so important.
Hmm.
But I still, again, don't have any complaints because I do feel like I had some good advocates in our school district here, and I wish that that was the case, across the country.
Right. And just real quick, since you mentioned IEP, you just recently had an IEP advocate on your podcast, right?
I did,
Uh,
yes. Jessica
Jessica.
Silva was on there, and she did really well talking about the differences between IEPs and 504s, and talking about how these documents need to be able to travel with you, if you were to move, and making sure that everything is well documented. So I would recommend that anyone who is tuning in here can listen to that episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you don't already subscribe to Sam's podcast, go ahead and search on iTunes and Spotify Beyond Labels. Sam has an amazing podcast where she brings professionals and other parents and really adding value to the special needs community. And if IEP is something that that you're concerned about, you want to learn more about, that episode was just unbelievable. I was also a guest in Sam's podcast in the early stages, so that was really cool that we had an opportunity to chat. So yeah, so go ahead, and I'm going to put in the comments all the links to the podcast, so you'll be able to go and
Awesome.
follow the podcast, leave a review, and really support the special needs community. So okay, so all right, so David is in school now, and he has a lot going on with the IEPs and whatnot. So, how was that for him?
So we went off of the assumption that most of the delays and the behaviors that he was exhibiting were caused by the prematurity and all of that from when he was little. So when he was tested for autism in the school district, they had a hard time determining whether or not some of the behaviors were caused by autism, or if they were caused by, not being able to see, for instance, because of the retinopathy or prematurity, or, if there was another cause. And so the school said that he did not have autism, but it didn't change anything the way that they were, because he still had the ARD meetings, he still had the IEP, he still had all of that. So it didn't change anything, but they did say that he didn't have autism. So it wasn't until I went to a program that we have here locally called Texas Panhandle Centers. And I took him in there, and I had an appointment with a lady, and she was asking me whether basically it was like I can't remember what they were testing him for services or something, but she says, "Are you comfortable with them saying that he doesn't have autism?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, I don't know. This is my only kid. I don't have experience with autism or anything else. I have experience with David. That's it." So she's like, I've been doing this for a really long time, and I can tell you, just by looking, that he's on the spectrum. I would have to do some more testing to, determine the severity of it, but I can tell you that, that he is definitely on the spectrum. And so
Right,
once once she said that, I started to kind of, learn more about it and kind of do some more research and kind of figure it out. And I think that now, looking at some of the things that he does, some of the, the quirks he has and stuff, I think he absolutely has it. But he also has several other diagnoses, including the intellectual disability, and the newest diagnosis, which is it's epilepsy caused by a schizencephaly. So,
hmm. Well,
yeah,
that's
when he
complicated.
was yes, it's a big word. It's one of those words that only special needs parents should
Yeah,
ever
right.
have to learn, right? So, when he was right before he turned 16, it was right in the middle of COVID, and so I was working at home, and him and I had taken lunch, and we had gone and had lunch with a friend, and we had just gotten back home. And so I was working, and he was in the living room, and he was watching TV. And suddenly I heard like a bang, and my initial thought was he dropped something or knocked something over or something. So I looked back, and I was, telling him, be careful or whatever. But when I looked at him, I saw that he was convulsing, and he was leaning up against the TV, and he had the remote control in his hand, and I could tell immediately. I'd never seen a seizure in real life, but I could tell immediately that he was having a seizure. And so I ran over to him, and I, kind of laid him down, and I was terrified. I honest to God, I thought he was dying. His lips were turning blue. He was like, it didn't look like he was breathing. And the whole thing probably took about 30 seconds before he stopped, but in my mind, it was an
Life.
eternity. So I managed to get him on the ground. He did his head on the way down, just because I couldn't. He's bigger than me, by the way. But I did get him onto the ground, and I called 911. And by the time I managed to get the dogs put away and let 911 in, he was not having a seizure anymore. He was just kind of laying there. And so, they came in and they were, trying to check him out and everything. And of course, they didn't realize when they walked in that he wasn't going to. They expected a neurotypical person to wake up. So they were kind of confused when he wasn't able to tell them, what day it was or what year it was or whatever.
Right.
But I ended up not letting him go by ambulance to the hospital because America, right? I'm not a millionaire, so I ended up having to take him to to follow up with the doctor after that. So we've been to a neurologist, and he's had MRIs and CT scans and everything, and that's how it was determined that he has the schizencephaly. And basically, it just means like there's clefts on the brain or something like that. Just basically a some kind of cleft on the brain. But what's interesting is that that has apparently always been there, and so something the neurologist said that stuck with me was that this whole time we've been blaming everything on his prematurity, when it's possible that the prematurity and everything following it was caused by the schizencephaly.
Oh,
Like it's
okay.
always been there, and all of this could have been caused by that. So that
Got
was
you.
that
Got
was
you.
interesting.
So in a sense, maybe even the fact that he was born premature helped him by being outside the womb. He had actual, doctors and nurses that could take care of him. Do you think that that may have been because we have the same thing, our story, some of the things that were always present, the fact that our son was born premature may actually have worked to his benefit. So
Right. And
really, or maybe it's just us trying to put the pieces together and just accept the fact that things don't always go according to our plan, right? But I'm really curious. I mean, during this whole process, I mean, you're spending most of your time between, well, all of your time between work and taking care of him. Did you have any type of resource, like any support group, or was it mostly you uh, doing research and talking to doctors and figuring everything out, on your own?
Mostly me. So, but to back up a little bit, we used to have home health nurses until they decided that he didn't need it anymore or whatever. So, what at that point, because you can't send a kid who's has a feeding tube and is significantly delayed and all of that, you can't send them to daycare. So I really struggled when they took the home health nursing away from me because I'm like, what am I supposed to do? I have to go to work. So at that point, we got him on a program called MDCP, which is the medically dependent children's program.
Mhm.
With that, we qualified for Medicaid, which is a huge help. So we got Medicaid for several years with that program, but also we got respite care. So I was able to hire my own respite attendant who would come, and they were given, I don't remember, something like 40 hours a week. And I could either take David to them or they could come to my house or whatever, but they would submit their time and they would be paid by the MDCP program. So that was a huge help for a while. But unfortunately, at gosh, David was probably 10, 11. They decided that he wasn't medically dependent enough to be on the medically dependent children's program.
Oh wow.
So because at that point they said the way they explained it to me was that this program is really designed for children who have trachs or continue to have Mickey buttons or maybe have IVs, constant or whatever, not necessarily
Okay.
kids. Because David, as he grew up, even though they said that he would have, he does have chronic lung disease, but he doesn't exhibit any signs of asthma or anything. So, really, overall, he's not really a sick kid, with the exception of the occasional seizure.
Okay, got it. No, no, and it's amazing that there's these guidelines of not not eating enough of a service to get disqualified, which is really, I mean, it's incredible. And while you were talking, I just did some research on, and it seems like this MDCP program, medically dependent children program, that's run by the state of Texas, is it?
Oh, is
or
it? Okay, I wasn't sure if it was
yeah,
exclusively to Texas, but maybe.
yeah, that's what it says here. So I'm not sure that other states have a similar program, but uh, becoming eligible for Medicaid sometimes, I mean, it can be a lifesaver, right?
Yes, and that was a huge problem for us too because, like I feel like there's a gray area where people that make too much money to qualify for any kind of government assistance, but not enough money to be able to pay for the therapies and the medical and all of that that the kids need. And so what happens is that the kids kind of suffer for that. So a good example of that is that back when David was on Medicaid through the MDCP program, he received therapy a couple of times a week at a local therapy place. And it was occupational therapy. So at that time they were doing puzzles with them, they would string beads and that kind of stuff. I've attended a million of these therapies, so I know what they do in them. But when we lost the Medicaid, we had to put him on a private insurance. And so what that means is now we had to start paying copays and we had to start, meeting our deductibles. And it was just, for us to go and it was a $45 copay to take him for a 30-minute session for them to do puzzles with him. And I'm not negating the benefit of puzzles and occupational
Right,
therapy. And I'm just saying that that was a big lift for me to be able to afford, to be able to do that. And so, unfortunately, I made the decision to stop getting that therapy because he was still getting the therapy through school. But that's one of the things that I think that a lot of people, a lot of kids probably lose those services because the parents are no longer getting the assistance that they were getting.
right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and sometimes we have to make decisions that, involve maybe cutting some costs if that's what it takes. And now back then, I mean, David is 18 now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and my son is 12. So 2012, still the healthcare scene was still a little different here in America, where private plans even had a lot of limitations as to like how many OT and PT sessions they would approve. I remember when my son was still in the hospital, he was automatically added to our insurance that we had at the time. But then, the social worker came and started talking to my wife, saying, "Listen, you have to get him on Medicaid. He's still in the hospital. He'll get approved right away." And then she was like, "Well, but why? I mean, we have our insurance and it's really good insurance, right?" And she says, "Well, it's got nothing to do with that. It's that they're going to start denying services because they have certain limitations." And then, sure enough, right when he was about to get discharged, he was already in a transition to Medicaid, still in the hospital. The Our private insurance put a cap on, like, I think it was like 60 PT sessions a year, and he was getting like three a week,
Hmm.
right? So the math wasn't mathing there, right? So now, even if you still need to get all those sessions now, but between copays, like you said, and co-insurance and out-of-pocket expenses, you could be running up thousands, potentially
Hmm.
tens of thousands of dollars every year to make sure that they get the therapies, right? And that's why we advocate for information, helping parents really find ways to get the benefits that are available. And once you have those benefits, how to preserve them by utilizing different tools that we have available, legal tools and financial tools that are available. Because these extra costs, I mean, can really, really ruin a family's life, or maybe force you to make a decision that maybe your child won't get certain services, right? And
Hmm.
so if you're watching now and you think there are other families that are going through the same challenges, now go ahead and share this with all of your friends. Really help us spread the word here and reach more and more families across America and bring this information to them so they can really feel like they have a resource now to talk to. So, all right, Sam, going back then, so you decided that that therapy, even though you saw value in it, that maybe that could be replaced with something at home or what have you, right?
Right, exactly. So I ended up just canceling that therapy, and then we were on we experienced a similar situation with another program in town that we qualified for the first year. But the second year it was it's a sliding based program, and so again, by the time just based on my income, it was like $400 a month just to get the therapies when they were to come to my house, and this was with another program, after the MDCP program. So we've kind of experienced this, over the course of time, which realistically, I feel like these children deserve these services regardless of whether or not the parents can pay for them. So I wish there was a way for them to get these even, just universally. That would be nice. But in the meantime, yeah, so right now we're working on getting him Social Security because I've been told for, the last 15 years that once he hits 18, all of these services will be based on his income and not my income.
Correct.
But as expected with anyone who has dealt with the Social Security office, they are often, um, they're challenging to deal with, and they sometimes we it's hard to get answers and stuff. So right now, I've been going back and forth with them. So that's the latest in the many battles that we fight as special needs parents. But I'm hoping that that will be ironed out fairly soon.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know what the Social Security Administration's offices are like in Texas or where you live, but I know down here where I live in South Florida, you can expect to be there for at least 3 to 4 hours every time you go. I mean, it's never shorter than that. And if it's any shorter, then rest assured they give you wrong information and it would have been a complete waste of time, right? So how do we navigate being a parent, being a caretaker, working full time, and still having to do all of these extra things, right? I mean, and we still, we only have 24 hours in a day, like any other parent. So it is very, very challenging. And I agree. I mean, a lot of this information regarding Social Security income and benefits, it's almost like they keep it complicated to scare people away from applying for these services to a certain extent, because it really shouldn't be that difficult, right? I know we're talking, I mean, I wasn't even going to go this direction, Sam, and I apologize, but sometimes I just get very emotional about certain things. As a country now, we're having conversations about universal health care and free college for everyone, right? Now we have a whole community, which is all great. I mean, if somebody can pay for it, but we have a whole community of children and adults with special needs who need certain services that their families a lot of times cannot afford, right? But because you're sometimes just above poverty line, you're disqualified from those services. But that doesn't mean that you have, lots and lots of uh, income or disposable income to pay for everything. So I feel like the average American family with a child with special needs is sitting in a kind of a limbo, right?
Mhm.
You're not too poor so that you qualify for all of the benefits, but you're not, comfortable enough to be able to pay for everything out of pocket. So what do you do, right? And it's so frustrating the way things are here, and that's in every state. I mean, some states are better than others, but
Definitely.
anyway, again, I mean, that was my rant. 'Cause, I mean, I sometimes I get really, really emotional and about these things. So now you're trying to figure out Social Security for him because he's 18 now. I know you sent me some pictures of him, so I'd love to share that.
Yes.
David,
So
today.
last
Mhm.
May, he actually did graduate from high school. So the way that it works where we live is they do graduate and walk the stage, which he did last May. And so that was super exciting, but he is continuing in the school district. So here they have a program called TAC, and it's TAK. I'm not sure what it stands for, but it's designed for individuals who have disabilities from the ages of 18 to 22 years old. And they partner with local businesses in town and they bring them out there and try to teach them to be employable, try to teach them how to be as independent as they can be. So they work with teach them how to take public transit. I know that they go to a local gym and they have them wipe off the machines, or they go out to a local restaurant and they have them clean off the menus, things like that. So they try to give them an opportunity to have a job if they can. So that's what he's doing now. So he still is in the school district, but he's no longer attending for academic purposes. Right now, it's for life skills.
Okay, that's fantastic. So they really help with that transition from school to workforce, if you
Hmm.
will, and just really help them become uh, um, gain more, an additional level of independence and start, doing things on their own. So,
Yep, and I'd
what
also
is?
like to put a
Mhm.
call out here because I'm not certain that everybody is aware of that, because I think that most people that I've talked to that don't have special needs kids don't have any idea of this. But if your child is not going to be able to live independently of you, you're going to have to file for guardianship for them. Like, there's a whole transition period from when they turn 18, from when they go from being your legal responsibility to when they're no longer your legal responsibility. And so, something that I always think about when somebody asks me why that's necessary, because if you think about it, my son right now, he's 18. So if he were to walk out the front door and just walk down the street and I were to call the cops can't do anything about it if I don't have guardianship over him. They would
Mm,
say, well, he's 18. He can do whatever he wants, not taking into
right.
consideration that he definitely needs supervision. You know what I mean? So, so you do have to, like, there's a whole transition thing, and I actually do have an episode of my podcast that people can tune in to listen to. That it's the episode with Jerry, and she talks about transitioning into adulthood. So that's a whole process that people have to go through.
That is so good that you did that episode because yes, transition into adulthood can be so complicated. Like you said, the guardianship is one thing, but then some certain government benefits change when they become adults. Now they're no longer a dependent, so it's not the parents' income or assets that count, for the means tested government programs, but now it's on them, it's on their income and their assets. So but I can only imagine, like, your child is an adult now, and say, they're in a hospital and you need access to their medical records. If you don't have, legal, if you don't have the legal documents in place, like the guardianship, or you can get it. I mean, they
Hmm.
won't release them to you. So they're still, very dependent on you on a lot of things, but because they're 18 now, you can't get it. So it can be, so do it beforehand, right? Did
Yes.
you do all of these things before he turned 18, or at least started working on them
Yes.
before he turned
So I don't
18?
know about all states, but I can tell you that in Texas, you can't apply for that until they turn 17 and a half. So the day he turned 17 and a half, man, I started, I had a lawyer, looking up, and you have to hire yourself a lawyer. And then the person that you're filing for guardianship of, they have to have their own legal counsel. So you have to hire a ad litem for them. So it's just a bunch of paperwork and stuff. It wasn't a difficult process at all, but it is time consuming, especially with COVID. They're still using COVID as an excuse for the courts moving slow,
Yeah,
even though that was 4
everything.
years ago. But so you never know how long it's going to take, and it did take, even though I started it the day that I could, it still took, there was still an overlap because my fear was that he was gonna turn 18 and there was gonna be some kind of medical, crisis or something, and I wasn't going to have guardianship over him, and what was I going to do if he, was refusing medical treatment on his own or something like that. So there was like a 3-month gap in between the time that he turned 18 and the time that I officially had the guardianship in place. But thankfully, nothing happened. But yeah, it is a timely process. So
Right.
get
Yeah.
started on it soon. And David's school was really good about notifying, like letting me know early so I could start working on it and so I was on top of things.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I believe Florida is the same way, once they turn 17 and a half. So I would just imagine that most states would have something like that because they know that certain things take time. And, if you wait until the day they turn 18, then even if it takes a few minutes, something could happen in those few minutes, right?
Hmm.
So you got
Exactly.
to start early. And that's why I think it's important to have a network, a support network of not only other families who go through the same things that you go through, but also some professionals that you can have access to. We have, in our group, we have Ashley McKenzie, who's an estate planning attorney, and she's there to answer questions, especially, related to federal benefits. She can answer questions about, any state, really. And so, but really to, kind of share some ideas and concepts of things that we could be looking at, early, right? And speaking of planning early, I know we've been on for gosh, almost 45 minutes now. And I feel like I could be here with you for hours, Sam, really talking about this because really, it's that important. But thinking like long term into the future, right? Um, what type of, plan or ideas or general guidelines do you guys have in place now, thinking, long term, maybe well into your and your husband's retirement and possibly even, after you're gone? I mean, how do you guys deal with that today?
So our plan right now is that he will live with us. He'll continue to live with us for as long as we're physically capable of taking care of him, which I hope is many, many years to come. At that point, we'll have to figure out some kind of group home because realistically, he's never going to live independently. So I'm hoping that by that time there will be some really good, group homes or something like that to put him in. But we did, speaking of lawyers, we did set up a special needs trust with our lawyer when we did that. And so what that means is that, you know what, you can probably tell everybody. Don't get me to lying about to these people about what a special needs trust is. You tell
Uh-huh.
them, Aldo.
No, I mean, that's really, the central piece of, financial and estate planning when you have a child with special needs. And I tell, every parent, even if your child is not currently receiving any government benefits or services, but they may become eligible in the future. And having these things in place beforehand will give you a lot of peace of mind knowing that everything that you do can be done using that special needs trust to protect those benefits while at the same time being able to build wealth, right? Even if it's like assigning the special needs trust as the beneficiary for your 401k retirement account at work, right? Or even your savings account. You do not want to pass assets involuntarily directly to your child because that could get messy real quick,
Hmm.
right? So I'm
Yep.
glad that you have that. You guys have that in place now. Do you have a plan to fund that trust in the future with all of the dollars that or at least many of the dollars that he's going to require throughout his lifetime?
You mean with all the money that my podcast is going to earn me?
Oh, I don't know, right? Yeah,
Yes,
I hope it
our
does.
life insurance will likely fund be the main contributor to that fund.
I am so happy to hear that. I mean, I'm so happy. I mean, a special needs trust and some permanent life insurance that's going to be used to fund the trust. That really is a very solid way to fund, our children's future. Because let's be honest here, right? Um, our children will hopefully live a very long life, a lot longer than we will, right? That's what we want. I get it that some parents even tell me that sometimes they wish that, their kids will go before them because they can't stand the thought of leaving their children behind and not knowing what's going to happen to them. And I get it. I totally get it. But we have ways of mitigating that and really having a plan that'll give us peace of mind, but that unfortunately costs a lot of money a lot of times. So we have to have a
Mhm.
plan in place. So I'm really glad that you have one. I mean, that makes me super, super happy. Most families don't.
Yes.
So that's why we do what we do. We share and we educate. So hopefully, other families will realize that there are a few things that they could have in place today that'll really give them peace of mind, and so they'll be able to go to sleep at night. Was that too complicated for you guys having the trust set up, or once you found a local estate planning attorney that knew how to do it, how was that experience?
I actually did not know what a special needs trust was until I went to the lawyer about so what we did, we decided to just kind of do it all in 1 year. Well, we had a lawyer, so we did the
Hmm.
guardianship, and then we did, my husband and I put together a will also. And when we had the same lawyer for that. So when we did the will is when he set up the special needs trust. So no, it was not complicated at all. The lawyer knew what he was doing, and so he just kind of walked us through it, and we paid him some money and signed the paperwork.
That's right. Yeah, you pay for peace of mind for both you and your husband,
Mhm.
and also for David, because having that in place now can really ensure, like I said, a lifetime of peace. Really knowing that everything is in its right place. So can't stress that enough how important it is. So Sam, again, I mean, like I said, I could stay here for hours, but I know you got things to do. Actually, you got some stuff coming up
I
in a
do.
few
I'm
minutes, right?
interviewing somebody else for my podcast
For your
here in a little
podcast.
bit. So,
So,
yes,
speaking of your podcast, I would like for you to share again the name of the podcast. How can people find you? How can they follow you? If somebody maybe thinks that they have a good life story, or if they work with special needs and they'd like to be a guest in your podcast, so tell our viewers, how they can get a hold
absolutely.
of you.
So, the name of my podcast is Beyond Labels, and you can find us on both Spotify and Apple Podcast. I also have a Facebook link and an Instagram link, and we can put those in the comments here so you can just click on them. It's basically a podcast that is, like I said, aimed at parents like me. So I am looking for guests that have expertise in any field that relates to special needs, be it a therapist, medical professional, legal expert, or another fellow parent that just wants to have a platform to share their story. So I would be honored to have you guys as my guest or as a follower. And also, we have an 877 number if you'd like to call and just leave a message or feedback. It's 877 4 Beyond.
877-4 Beyond, like the whole
Yep.
word.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to put this
BEYOND.
I'm going to put this right on the screen here. Let's see if
Perfect.
I know how to do this.
There we go. Yep.
All right, perfect. That is
Yep. So
so cool.
you
That
can
is
call and
so
leave
cool.
us a number, leave us a message.
All right, fantastic. So I'll make sure to put all of those links in the comments below this video, everywhere we're streaming this, so that if you're watching and you want to reach out to Sam, you know how to get a hold of her. Also, if you're still watching here, then I really, really urge you to go ahead and share this with as many families as you can. Share it in your local special needs groups with your friends, families. Really help us reach more and more people. That's the only way we'll be able to make an impact and make everybody's lives a little easier, a little smoother, because that's our goal here. So, Sam, once again, thank you so very much.
Thank you,
And
Aldo. Thanks for the time.
thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll be back next week, next Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, with another guest. We do these every week to bring some quality content and some really, really great stories to you. And until then, have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you.